It's been a while.
It has been a while. It's nice to
Yeah.
see you again.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm not even sure we did video the first time we met. I think it was an
Yeah, I
audio.
think that was in the old days.
It was in the old days. We're getting old, Charles. We're getting old. Where are you right now?
Rhode
I love
Island.
your Rhode Island. Okay.
Yeah.
I love your backdrop. It looks like a Persian rug or something.
It's it's a, it's a little tapestry I got in a secondhand store, but you see there's the three graces here.
Yeah.
And then I
Oh,
don't know if you
cool.
can see, but back there's a warrior.
Oh, I can't see that. Maybe it's my eyes.
There's a warrior way back there. And then down here is his helmet and his sword. So he's in the
Oh,
very awkward position. Um,
I see that.
yeah, anyway.
That's cool. You're very symbolic. I wanted to. I don't know. I've kind of. I mean, we haven't stayed in touch. My fault. I'm not great at that. I don't know about you, but it's something I keep saying to myself. I gotta figure out how to stay in better touch with people that inspire me and whatnot. And so I'm actually really grateful for this podcast because it gives me a reason to do that.
Hmm.
Um, but I loved our conversations before or after I read your book. And you'll have to remind me of the title. It wasn't Sacred Commerce, but it was something along those lines.
The more
What
beautiful, oh, sacred economics, maybe it
Sacred
was.
Economics, yeah, and a
Yeah.
more beautiful
The more beautiful
world.
world our hearts know is possible. Hmm.
That's right. And were those were kind of some of your earlier works,
Yeah.
or yeah, and just beautiful writing, and I really shared your vision, and I love your style, and so I was excited to kind of somehow pop back up on your radar or vice versa, and to see some of the things you're working on. So I'm really interested. I just really wanted to have a conversation about what's really changed, what's up in your mind and your heart these days. I'm curious, obviously, about your next book, The Coronation, but I don't want to get into that just yet because I want to remind our listeners, well, not remind because most of them are probably new to you anyway. So let's start with just kind of like, who is Charles Eisenstein, and what inspired you to become a writer and a philosopher and to do what you're doing right now?
Yeah, I
Pretty
never
broad question.
aspired. Yeah, I mean, I could, take that back in a lot of different directions, but
Mhm.
I'll say that I never aspired to be a writer
Okay.
or a philosopher. I don't think that what the world needs the most right now is more people coming up with ideas and talking about them. But I, through my journey, like I came to see some things that, um, in a way that nobody else was talking about,
Mhm.
and I just like I had pretty much no choice, like to write about them.
Why do you
Um,
think that was?
um, I guess to make a long story short, I went through a process of alienation from the normality that our society narrates to us, that our
Hmm.
society has established and offers us.
Hmm.
The normality of, um, it could be scientific reality, it could be economic reality, it could be, um, medical reality, the capacities of the human body, the capacities of the human mind, the way the world is and should be. I had experiences that punctured that bubble of normality or reality. And
Metaphysical experiences, or
I mean, in
what?
some cases, yeah, in
Mm-hmm.
some cases more mystical, in other cases, like very, very fleshly. Like, for
Hmm.
example, I
Hmm.
used to live in Taiwan in my early 20s. I, you know, kind of was a refugee from academia. I, had been like,
Refugee. That's
yeah,
funny.
had been on a success trajectory, let's say,
Hmm.
and I just, on one level, I just couldn't take it. I
Hmm.
just couldn't handle it. I couldn't make myself do the things that one is expected to do
Yeah.
to be an upstanding member of
Yeah.
society.
I understand
So
that. And
anyway, there I was in a foreign culture, and I began to experience things that my received version of reality denied as even being possible.
Mm-hmm.
For example, I had a severe ankle injury that was similar to one I had running cross country in college. Like it was put me on crutches for six weeks, and there I got taken to this. The guy I was the bartender where I was working took me to. He's like, "Oh yeah, I'll take you to a doctor. It looks really bad, like all swollen and inflamed." He takes me to this what he calls a doctor, but it's actually like this one room cement floored clinic with no separate waiting room, and it's like a traditional Chinese doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and he's smoking a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
Like this was like not anything that was on my radar screen,
I
but
love it.
this severe injury, he fixed it in very agonizing fashion by digging his thumbs into it and pulling and yanking and putting an herbal paste on it. But it was better the next day.
Injury. That's
And
incredible.
I was like, hold on, that is not possible.
Right. The
And I had
Western
experience.
guy would have cut it
Right.
open and, laid you out for
He
months.
would have no. He would have said he would have given me ibuprofen and put me on crutches, put a cast on it, and said, "Wait 6 weeks."
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like I'm like, okay, the pinnacle of medical science is not even able to do what this
The
unschooled.
cigarette smoking unschooled guy in a
Yeah,
cave, basically.
yeah,
That's
right.
awesome.
And then I came into contact with qigong,
Right.
and
Yeah.
various Taoist practices, and yeah. So I was like, okay, what happens if I really take in this one data point that doesn't fit the matrix?
Right.
Then everything falls apart. I have to
Everything
start
ripples from
questioning.
there. Right.
Yeah, yeah. So that's one of the experiences. Like there was a series of experiences like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I could tell a lot more of the story. But I think almost everybody, probably listening to this has had experiences,
Right.
whether like mystical experiences, experiences of
Mm-hmm.
synchronicity, um, like paranormal experiences, healing experiences. That if you really take them in, you have to question everything.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that as a starting point. And most do not. In an entire scientific community, has like an uncomfortable shrug around those things.
Yeah,
If
they just put them in some other
it's some
category of
category that's just like, well,
yeah,
if it's not observable and explainable, then
right,
it's not real. They don't say that it didn't happen. They just say it's just an anomaly of the subjective
right.
experience and blah blah
But
blah.
we do that too. I mean, not even
Yeah,
scientists.
right.
Like most people do that
Most people do that.
to preserve reality.
Right. Preserve the
Yeah,
framework or the structure, the cognitive structure of what we call real. My version of
right.
that was I don't remember if we talked about this or not, but I was doing probably exactly what you were doing, except my profession was going to be Wall Street, and I was 21 at NYU Stern School, just cranking out my MBA and getting my CPA and all that. But I stumbled upon a Zen master
Hmm.
through a martial art that I stumbled upon. My spirit led me to it because I was looking for something more contemplative that combined physical with mental training. And so I started Zen training at as a white belt at 21, having no prior martial arts experience because I grew up in a very small town in upstate New York. And so, and I trusted this guy implicitly because he was categorically different than any other human being I'd ever seen in my life. There was just something radically different about him. And I was like,
Hmm.
really intrigued. And I came from an abusive kind of alcoholic father. And I was like, so he was my first true example of what a real man should be. And, a whole person.
Hmm.
And so that was why at 21, I trusted him and meditated every day because I was like, whatever he's got and he's saying, do this, I'm doing it. And I started to have these, experiences, not dissimilar, dissimilar in kind, but not in nature of what you had, right? Where I started to having visions and all sorts of cool experiences, almost like you would experience on a single psychedelic journey, right? And it completely transformed my cognitive structure and idea and self identity. And it led me to walk away from all that and become a warrior, like the guy in your tapestry, a Navy
Yeah.
SEAL, a modern version of a warrior who was out protecting and, you know, fulfilling his Dharma, like Arjuna,
Hmm.
in the Bhagavad Gita.
Hmm.
And that was the right path for me. And it opened up so much for me.
Hmm.
But most people, look at that as just kind of a life crisis of purpose. And I look at it as something a little bit more, I guess, more involved with penetrating what's really real with a capital R versus what we perceive to be real, right? Which is what's taught, or what your social structure is kind of believed to be real. Anyways, so I guess I'm saying, cool, right? We got that in common to some degree, except you're a philosopher and I'm not. I just went on to be a warrior.
Yeah. Uh, I think it's this kind of thing though is happening to more and more
I
people
think so.
because not only does a larger reality beckon to
Mm-hmm.
us, but the existing reality is becoming more and more uncomfortable.
Good point. Yeah.
Like it's just not working anymore for people.
Right.
Even if you play by all the rules and uh, you know build that CV and
Mm-hmm.
do everything you're told and go to the dentist every 6 months and get your prostate exam, and do all the things you're supposed to
Those are
do.
all very uncomfortable
Like,
things, by the way.
yeah, like you're supposed to, like the implicit promise is that if you do all those things, then you'll be happy.
Right.
You'll be healthy. You'll be happy. There's the formula.
Mm-hmm.
And people who obey the formula nowadays, they're running headlong into a sandstorm of confusion, like um, whether it's chronic health problems or um, dead end careers or just like generalized depression or divorce,
Right.
or their children have become suicidal or like
Yeah.
normal life
Well, yeah.
the it doesn't work
Well,
anymore.
even in the
And now we're seeing
business or
it.
organizational or even global cultural sense, it seems to be not
Yeah,
working.
right. And so that's the push. There's a pull that takes the form of these extraordinary experiences that we have that say there is a bigger reality out there. And then there's the push. It's almost like a birth push where the womb has become uncomfortable and it's expelling
Right.
us.
We're trying to, what a new
Mhm.
version of human reality is trying to emerge. It's interesting. I'm curious if more people are experiencing this, or it's just that because of the global interconnectedness and people's willingness now to talk about it because of conversations like this, we're just learning that more people are willing to express it, or they have an avenue to express it. And that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Or it's possible that consciousness is actually kind of accelerating in its journey toward more wholeness,
Mhm.
less
Yeah.
separation.
I mean, I'm not sure what your take on it is, but whether we're talking about like the breakdown of the political
Mm-hmm.
system, the uh, venomous climate on social media, the um, what I consider to be a public health catastrophe
Mm-hmm.
in the way that we responded to
Me as
COVID,
well.
um, the economic situation, inflation. I mean, just on so many levels,
Mm-hmm.
the uh, world of normalcy is crumbling at the edges, and a lot of people cannot uh, even make ends meet anymore.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's an objective phenomenon.
It is objective, and we can only respond to it subjectively, and it's co-created as a result of our subjective minds, right? I believe that my philosophy's orientation says that the mind creates our reality, and the co-created reality is a co-creation of our collective minds, and it may not be instantaneous. It plays out over a number of years, but what we're
Hmm.
seeing here is hundreds of years of negative thinking and um, disassociation from self, and also probably a very deliberate attempt to insert institutions between individuals and God, or between individuals and their autonomy. Right. And you see how all of
Hmm.
our systems in the United States, at least, have been organized. It's like, oh, yeah, you need this in between your health, right? Insurance and doctor. You need this in between your education. You need this in between, right? You for God, right? So it's religion. And the reality is, the human being doesn't need any of that when they're in control of their mind and they're able to think clearly.
Hmm.
And so,
I'm writing an article right now on the title is something about transhumanism and the
oh,
metaverse,
interesting. Yeah.
which is a another example of what you're talking about, where even the um, capacity to experience life becomes dependent on this intermediary called
Right.
technology. where where dependency on technology extends all the way to the level of the immune system, of the physical body, which has already been happening for a
Mm-hmm.
long time. Like people are mostly, in most parts of this country anyway, are addicted to air
Mm-hmm.
conditioning. Like you become addicted to comfort, and then the range of comfortable temperatures gets
Right. And you
smaller and
lose the capacity
smaller
to adapt.
as you
Right.
get right, or you become um, addicted to the intense stimuli of the virtual world, so that normal life seems
Right.
boring, and you feel actually discomfort if you're not receiving that intense
Right.
stimuli, or the interposition of technology in our communication and social reality, where you can no longer even be social if you're not connected to the internet. Now, I'm exaggerating the case a little bit, but during COVID, it kind of did become
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah.
Like you were in many places on Earth required to stay indoors. You had to have a
Right.
pass, uh, an official pass to emerge into the social world. So,
Unbelievable.
like this this trend that you're speaking of has really accelerated in the last few years, but it's not a new thing.
No. No.
And so I really like to think about what the alternative
Right.
is, and what is the vision of
Right.
humanity that underlies this movement toward more and more dependency, and as you were saying, also a surrender of
Yeah.
sovereignty to the
I,
intermediaries.
Fascinating conversation. I have my beliefs on that. I believe that there is an elite technocracy that really believes, and I even think you wrote about this recently, and because I was like nodding my head, going, and it really believes they're doing the right thing. So
Yeah,
Schultz and the Great Reset and Chinese Communist Party, right? They believe they're doing the right thing, and they believe that they have the authority and the answers, and that the mobs, which would include you and I, by the way, need to heed to their technocratic excellence. It's a very elitist, arrogant attitude,
yeah,
but they don't see it that way. And it might even be
right,
more insidious than that. But if I go there, the big C conspiracy theory label will be thrown at me. It may be more insidious than that
yeah,
because this has been going on for several thousand years. When the ancient
right,
pharaohs were started to understand the power of imagery and controlling the masses through imagery, and that's what media is doing
yeah.
now.
I'm yeah, and I'm actually rather wary of the big C
Yep.
conspiracy theory, because it's like this
Yep.
simplification.
True.
It takes a complicated reality with many actors and many
True. Yeah.
influences that are all interrelated, and it reduces it to a matter of good guys versus
Yeah.
bad guys, which
Which is
is this.
strong duality thinking, right? And you're right. It's way more
Yeah,
complicated, and you can look at it much more
right,
probably clear headed or with clear eyes from a more spiritual perspective, even I think, and you get the answers right you're
right.
looking for.
And it's also a kind of a victim
True that.
mentality. It says that the source of my troubles is something outside of
Right.
myself, and that there's a certain comfort in that, because you no longer have to take responsibility. It's kind of like actually what happened in COVID, where here we have decades long deterioration in general
Mm-hmm.
levels of health, and it's not caused by a virus
Mm.
or a bacteria. Autoimmunity is not caused by a pathogen. Allergies are not caused
Right.
by a pathogen. Anxiety,
Yeah.
depression,
Caused by being out of balance.
addiction,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? There's nothing to
Yeah.
fight. Now, all of a sudden, here comes a virus. And from the authorities down to the public, everyone's like, oh, good. Now we can do something
Yeah.
about it. Now because what do we know how to do? We know how to isolate, we know how to control, we know how to kill.
Right.
So there was a comfort in the familiarity, and in the illusion that this is something under our control, and so we projected everything onto this one thing. So that mindset can be translated. It's the same mindset that says the virus is the pedophilia
Right.
elite, and the solution then is to tear them
Right.
down
Right.
by force.
Same mindset.
Same mindset,
You know,
and the same export of it's really an export
that's
of
right. Yeah.
sovereignty. And we never ask, why, even if they do exist, okay, the big C conspiracy, what gives them
We do.
power? It's not like they have bigger
Right.
muscles than
And
we do. It's not that they have
right.
superpowers. It's our
That's right.
acquiescence to it. And why do we acquiesce?
Well,
That's the question to
partly because
ask.
we've been trained
Yeah.
to, because we've been trained out of sovereign thinking, and so that's a
Hmm.
big part of our mission, is to bring that thinking back to individuals, right? So that they can think more clearly about their power, and then retrain themselves, retrain their minds to come back to freedom.
Ultimately, it comes down to
Right.
who do you trust, you know? And I lost my trust in the mainstream authorities and their systems of knowledge production a
Yeah.
long time ago because of the
Right.
story I just told you. Because I've experienced things in my life that the knowledge authorities, for example, institutional science, say
Yeah.
are nonsense. And I'm like, okay, should I believe you or my own lying eyes? Like I
Right.
experienced that. And you have categorically removed it from reality. So I know, like this is comes down to my personal experience. I know that the picture of what's real and possible that we are handed is
Mm-hmm.
woefully limited,
Exactly.
and that predisposes me to listen a lot more to the dissidents and the critics and the
Mm-hmm.
and the heretics than I otherwise would if I were just limited to the um,
Yeah.
the
No,
news.
I'm reading
Yeah.
Michael Pollan's book right now, and How to Change Your Mind about psychedelics, and just
Hmm.
smiling at the story about how the Catholic Church, this and the Spanish side, really just, they were the first ones to outlaw psychedelics, right? Because they
Hmm.
saw how they were being used by the Aztecs, and they're like, "Oh my God, these guys are having a direct God experience. That that's not going to happen under our watch." Right. And so they literally demonized and
Right.
made the use of psychedelics heretical. And then then they kind of sprouted again in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, and then the U.S. government said, "Oh no," probably some forces in there said, "Oh, this is dangerous," right? Because look at the movement of the 60s and the counterculture, and this is like a
Mhm.
threat to our government.
Yeah, and in a sense, they were right. It was a threat to
Mm-hmm.
society as we
Right.
know it. Like that's what they said back in those days. If we allow these to spread, it'll end society as
Right.
we know it.
And so their answer was
And
to
I'm like, yeah,
demonize them
that's a good
and roll them up into the war on drugs and make people think, to this day,
right.
I've been very open. Like, I've got a podcast this afternoon with two folks who are healing vets, like with a snap of a finger over a weekend, doing
Amazing.
ibogaine
Yeah,
and 5-LEO DMT. And I went down to experience it. And it was a beautiful
yeah.
experience. It wasn't my first, but I, for really literally up until about the last 3 months, Charles, I wouldn't speak of my psychedelic experiences on a podcast.
I came out
Yeah,
20 years ago, but
I wouldn't,
but
because
yeah,
I still
right.
had that kind of, I don't know, cultural kind of like stigma. I was still carrying it.
Man, we got to stop
I
playing it
know, right? I
safe,
do.
Mark. You know, I mean, if you're going to be a warrior,
We
we got to
do.
stop playing it safe because every time that we don't talk about something that we secretly believe, we're
Yeah, that's
gaslighting
silence
everybody
and violence
else who
in
secretly
our
believes it.
kind of lexicon, or their lexicon. Yeah.
To answer the earlier question, how do the uh, elites govern when they don't have actual superpowers? They govern through
Really. Oof.
not so much everybody's agreement with them, but through the perception that everybody agrees with them.
Right.
It looks like
Right.
everybody, it's like the emperor's new clothes.
By controlling the narrative.
It looks
By
like it's
controlling the
like the
narrative.
emperor's new clothes. It's like, gosh, the emperor looks
Yeah.
naked, but everybody else is acting as if he's not naked. So maybe I'm a fool. But everybody's
Right.
thinking that. And that's why it's
Right.
so important
Yeah.
now to like come out, whether it's psychedelics or paranormal experiences or, in the health arena, um,
Mm-hmm.
childbirth, like all of the whistleblowers, all of the dissidents, like
Mm-hmm.
this is the time to be brave.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. Yeah, my big kind of turning point was all the censorship. And I'm 58 years old. I've never. I mean, maybe it existed and I just didn't know about it. But holy crap! Suddenly we have like major censorship going on, and,
Yeah.
and being pressured by the elites or by the government or whatever, whatever you want to put an air quote
Yeah. I
around
never
it.
thought I'd live to see
And so that was new
I
for
never
me.
thought I'd live to see the day, where I'd be on a podcast and I would deliberately avoid saying the V word because
Right.
like some, algorithm is going to, go through there and flag it. I'm like, oh my gosh, I
Right.
mean, am I in Soviet Russia here? Like just, and how instinctive it was to be careful about what I say because Big Brother is watching. Like that really threw me for a
Right.
loop.
Right. And I guess the fact check would be for everyone listening is if things were dramatically better as a result of that censorship, as a result of, the government and all their policies, then I'd back down and be like, okay, I was wrong. But I don't see that, right? I don't see any evidence of that. I see things getting worse. I see things breaking down. At the same time, and we can kind of pivot here, I also see a more beautiful world on the other side of the chaos, right? And the other side of this, and we see that with the sproutings of blockchain and the promise of Bitcoin and the growing consciousness and psychedelics coming back into the lexicon, into the experience of the ordinary citizens, and even the legalization
Mm-hmm.
of that, and many other data points which are largely on the fringes, or certainly were just even a few years ago, are now becoming more kind of
Yeah.
accepted.
Yeah. I'm also very positive actually about the way things are going. On the
Mm-hmm.
surface, things look worse and worse, but underneath there's a huge seismic shift happening in consciousness.
Right.
Like I occasionally sit in medicine ceremonies, psychedelic ceremonies, and like in the last year, so many new people have come to it,
I know.
like
Right.
regular people.
Right.
I mean, these aren't like hippies. These are like,
Right.
I mean, yeah, ex-military or like normal, like corporate people. Like it's and not to say
Yeah.
that psychedelics automatically enlighten you or even make you into a better person. Like I've, in the psychedelic space, definitely come across, fairly psychopathic people who are,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know,
Yeah.
but
But if I could say something on that, having studied um, meditation and now psychedelics, and also kind of Western psychotherapy, there's this kind of saying that you have to be somebody before you can be nobody.
mhm,
And so there are people, many people who have no business doing psychedelics until they have many years of therapy under their belt because their ego structures are not fully formed yet. And so this is where you get the God complexes and psychic shifts and breaks. And so this is kind of like a little warning footnote for folks. Don't just jump into a psychedelic therapy ceremony, right? If you're not like emotionally, mentally stable, there could be challenges.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've also seen people who gave every indication of being pretty darn unstable have
You have great
have
healing.
huge healing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
So
know this is a conundrum.
yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, like that even like the psychedelics is just one aspect of this shift in the core of our culture.
Right.
Like another indication is I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the last few years, despite the vitriol and venom online, people seem to be
Mm-hmm.
getting kinder and more considerate in person.
I have noticed that.
Even like at TSA going through the airport. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, sometimes people are having a bad day and stuff, but in general, it seems like people are less identified with their roles in the prison experiment, uh, where
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
TSA person's a dickhead just because they have this petty power.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen as much anymore. Like people are less
Yeah,
identified
no,
with
you're
their
right.
role.
The aggro feeling of flying has seemed to have dissipated or evaporated
Yeah,
altogether.
but people are less
The
identified with their
anxiety.
roles and therefore more able to be in their humanity with each other. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a subtle shift, but I'm curious whether you and your listeners have noticed.
I have noticed that, but I probably wouldn't have identified it until you brought that up. I just flew to Europe, to Egypt and back, and it was actually a very pleasant experience.
Mhm.
And I didn't fly first class. Generally speaking, overseas, I try to fly business class. But I was stuck in an aisle with everyone else in the general coach section, and it was a pleasant experience. And I think it's what you're talking about. Everyone was very pleasant,
Mhm.
including the TSA, and that's happening
Yeah.
more and more. You're right. That's interesting. You could just say, well, that's because everyone got stuck inside in the pandemic, and It caused them to do some
It predated the
self-reflection.
pandemic, though.
You think so?
Yeah, when
Yeah.
my eldest son was in high school, I sat down with him and his brother, and we watched The Breakfast Club. Do you remember that movie?
Hmm. Great movie.
Yeah,
Yeah. I love
and
that.
I was like, afterwards, I'm like, so how'd you like it? Isn't that just like it? High school. He's like, no, Dad. What century are you from? It's not like that anymore. He's like, today, if somebody's bullying another kid, they'll be ostracized. Like, there's
Right.
hardly any bullying in my school, and he was not going to any elite kind of school. He was going to like a below average public high school. He's like, yeah, bullying is not cool. Whereas in my day, like you almost had to like lord it over the weird kids in order to be popular. And
Hmm.
it had changed to if you do that, you won't be popular. And I thought
Hmm.
that was like there's still a lot of online bullying, but
Hmm.
in person, I don't know. Maybe I've got rose colored glasses on, but in person, it seems like it has changed.
Yeah, it's interesting how to reconcile some of these polarities. So we have people kind of addicted to the hyper arousal of technology and immersing themselves for hours a day, even if it's just their iPhone or video games or whatnot. Well, at the same time, they're becoming nicer and more inclusive, more collaborative. And actually, my grandkids, are great examples of how most of their learning has come from Minecraft and Fortnite and building things in worlds that you and I had never got
Mm-hmm.
to experience, when we were kids.
Maybe part of it
It's
is, like when we're um, cruel to somebody, when we're mean, when we're inconsiderate, usually it's because we're not seeing them as a full human being. We're seeing a
Yes.
projection, a judgment, an image of the real thing. Well, when
That's right.
we're online, then what we're presented with is images of people. We're not
Hmm.
actually interacting with the flesh and blood from the
Right.
body.
You're seeing an
Yeah, it's
avatar,
an
a
avatar.
representation.
It's a profile name. It's like some anonymous uh, uh, username on Twitter. Like the embodied experience is not the experience of interacting with a full human being. So I think
Hmm.
that makes it a lot easier to um, dehumanize those
Yeah.
people, and so it gives vent to like all of these uh, shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting theory. I like that. The other thing that's crossing my mind right now, and this might be because I live in California, but I think it's more of a global conscious thing, is that a lot of parents have kind of given up this notion of, you have to control every aspect of your child's life,
Mm-hmm.
and given up the parental bullying in terms of the hardcore discipline being the right way. And so, kids these days are growing up with more autonomy, with more freedom to explore, and with less childhood trauma, and therefore they have more self-respect, and so they're not likely to judge and to project those negative things that you and I experienced. It's a
Yeah,
possibility.
I
Yeah.
think in some ways maybe, but in other ways, children are subject to even more control than ever. Like you can
How so?
do
Not
almost anything you want
parentalized.
online, but uh, how many kids do you see? Say, how many 10-year-olds do you see unsupervised in public space?
Well, yeah, that's right, because it's not safe.
When I was a
Airports
kid,
and
like we would
yeah,
roam a mile from home,
we were roaming
go
everywhere.
swimming in
Yeah,
the
the world
creek,
was our right.
like
Yeah.
start a little campfire up on the abandoned
Yeah, that
quarry.
that goes back to the conundrum that we're talking about, right? So yeah, the great outdoors seems to be off limit to kids, so they found their great outdoors in the metaverse or in the
Right. A simulation of
technological
the real thing,
simulation of the
which
real
is
thing.
bounded and ultimately controlled. And
Interesting. Yeah.
it gives you a substitute for real adventure, but it never tests your limits in the same
Yeah.
way that physical experience does, like walking barefoot over gravel. Like that
Right.
never happens.
I agree with you from the perspective of this is the reality that we think is real outside of us, but there's zero chance that we're not in a simulation. And spiritually speaking, that's an accurate statement as well, right? So this entire world is a mental projection. And so what's to say that there isn't a layer of reality above this, which, you could say the same thing. You're like, look at all these humans, having, living in this metaverse called Earth.
Mm-hmm.
It's not real. And then now we're recreating that. This is very much like the Matrix theory.
Right.
We're recreating that. And so now there's another layer of verses, right? And so this is the multiverse concept. Maybe there's multiple verses that we live in, and this is just one aspect of our reality, and the others are living on some other dimension. That's pretty far out there, but it's an interesting theory.
Yeah, I've heard that theory before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's continue this thread around the positive view of the future. What's your view on kind of blockchain and Bitcoin? I'd love to hear your perspectives on that, and both philosophically and also the impact it'll have on the economy.
Well, one thing that it's done is it has exposed the nature of money as being a convention, as being an agreement, and not just a fact of reality.
Right.
So if you can make different money, then you could also change the money that we have by simply changing our agreements around it. So it suggests a sovereignty that we didn't know that we had, and thereby makes it all the more intolerable that we are not exercising that sovereignty, that we have surrendered it to an inhuman, out of control system administered by unaccountable private interests, such as the central banks. So, like, that's one effect that it's had. Also, like blockchain more generally, and other, expressions of cryptography, they open up all kinds of new domains for decentralized governance, for direct democracy, for other ways besides centralized institutions to make collective decisions and to coordinate our creativity and labor. And in that regard, like, the crypto revolution is just in its infancy. Now, it kind of got hijacked by speculative greed.
Yeah, definitely.
And now, we're seeing all that shake out, which I think ultimately will be a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. On the other side of that, once we get some sensible regulation and all the crackpot stuff gets flushed out of the system.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. The regulation could just be a way to tame it and make it yet another creature of the centralized institutions. So, I mean, we could. I don't know. I'm not sure if either of us have enough knowledge to really drill down into that issue, but it is a caution.
It's here to stay, though. I mean, we're recording this podcast at one of the bottoms, where FUD is starting to take over, and people, some of the mainstream kind of, not mainstream, but bigger crypto investment funds and custodial institutions are struggling and laying off, like Coinbase and whatnot.
Yeah.
And and the doomsayers are saying, "See, I told you, it just took a little bit longer than I thought, but Bitcoin has no value whatsoever." That's like the Bank of England guy saying Bitcoin has zero value whatsoever. So it's an interesting time, and so people are questioning. And I'll share my view. I think Bitcoin will be the digital gold of the future. It's a massively valuable store of value, and all the models that I've been privy to in terms of valuation put Bitcoin valuation right now at between 60 and 100 something thousand. So it's greatly undervalued. It's a phenomenal buying opportunity for investors. And when we look at it with a long view set of glasses on, Bitcoin could be kind of the reserve currency of the world in 8-10 years.
You could be
worth $1 million per Bitcoin. It could be, right? Or it could, something disastrous could happen to it and it could go. But my view is that it will survive. It's the strength is in that decentralization and the adoption, right? And it can't be shut down. Like China tried that. It can't be shut down unless the entire internet goes down. And then by then, there'll be satellite-based internet. I mean, it'll find a way, because it's not controlled by anybody or any one thing. It really has a
Yeah.
mind of its own almost.
Yeah. Again, there's a, a, a more complicated conversation to be had there.
Yeah.
I mean, China did kind of shut it down in China, you know, like
Well, that's what they say, but all the miners have come back online.
in China.
Yeah.
I mean,
Just in
if
the
you're
past few
facing, like,
weeks.
say, years of imprisonment, are you going to run a server farm?
I know, right?
Are you going to take that risk?
I don't know how they do. Yeah, they're doing it
Yeah.
through anonymous and masking and everything. So they're taking a huge risk.
Right.
I think maybe China just wanted to get their arms around it and get their digital yuan, enough kind of legs. Then
Yeah.
they'll, once other countries start to adopt it, they will have to, right? They'll have to come back online. But again, this is all speculative.
So, Mark, I'll just ask you a question.
Sure, please, sir.
What is like the core? You mentioned that the purpose of your podcast is to help people regain their sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
What is the core of that in your mind?
So it's a great question. Sovereignty to me comes with taking control back of how we train our minds, and that how we train our minds then will dictate everything else. And I believe the body is even an expression of the mind. And so if we want absolute health, then train your mind for absolute health. If you want longevity, you want to live to 150, train your mind to live to 150. And my evidence are the yogis who've, like, either Babaji or others who train their minds to keep their bodies alive for a very long time. Again, Western science would just poo-poo this, and I can't march a yogi into my podcast studio and who's hundreds of years old, but I've read enough accounts and I've had enough experience of my own around the capacity of the mind to dictate the body that I personally believe this. And so I'm, that's one area where I have been fearless in kind of sharing my ideas. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of a yogi at heart. So, and I believe that the more an individual evolves, trains their mind and evolves their consciousness, the less separation they feel, the more inclusive they become, until ultimately, they experience the unity consciousness. And I believe that unity consciousness is not reserved for a few enlightened beings, but is the birthright of all humans. And so you could say one of my, beyond bringing people autonomy and sovereignty, is to democratize enlightenment and to demystify it and to scale it. That's what I want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And my mission is to train and inspire 100 million to come to this path of, what I consider to be a Western path or a modern path toward what I just described, which requires daily activities around self-mastery in combination with, a service mindset and doing things that benefit other human beings, self-mastery and service.
Mm-hmm.
How does that resonate with you? Is it?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking of, I've thought a bit about longevity, and a paradox occurred to me. To a certain point, yeah, like you can take care of yourself and, be healthier and live longer. But at some point,
The question is why.
the things you have to do to achieve extraordinary longevity
Right.
means letting go of the motives that motivated you to seek longevity in the first place.
Totally agree.
Which is all about me.
That's right.
As long as it's all about me, you're going to be in a certain sense like tight and controlled and not really fully in the flow of life.
Right.
And to open up to the full flow of vitality, you have to make it not all about yourself, as you were saying, to make it about service. Right. And at that point, maybe you can then, through that, achieve extraordinary longevity, but you won't even care anymore.
You won't care. That's right. I agree with that. So the longevity is kind of a fun aim, really, for optimal health, lifespan as opposed to, or health span as opposed to lifespan. Right. Is one way of looking at it. And I also think that like the accounts of those who've done it, and I've seen accounts from qigong martial arts as well as yoga of individuals who've lived for more than
Hmm.
100 years.
Yeah.
They literally have to segregate themselves from society because it's just too unhealthy and negative and toxic, right?
Right.
And so, but there might be a point in the future where that's not true, right? Where you're gaining energy
Hmm.
in terms in your relationships and in being a part of culture,
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's a
One of the
fascinating
concepts
subject.
I've been working with a bit, it's actually in the epilogue of the book that's coming out, is building a parallel society.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's not, it's kind of drawing off Buckminster Fuller's
Hmm.
famous quote: "You don't change things by fighting the existing reality,
Right,
but by build a new model that makes the old one obsolete."
right.
And so, in many areas, you mentioned, like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, that's like a parallel financial system.
Hmm.
Holistic health modalities, that's a parallel healthcare system.
Hmm.
We're doing like all kinds of radical schooling
Right.
experiments. That's a parallel educational system. We're growing more of our own food, parallel agricultural system. Like we're
Hmm.
creating all of these institutions, and but also the consciousness around them and the values embedded in them are also parallel. They're different
Hmm.
from the mainstream. And so it could very well be, as you say, that when we immerse ourselves in that parallel society, no longer is it a source of pollution and something we have to resist because it's always trying to tear us down from our sovereignty and from our positivity. It's actually the opposite. It's
Right.
actually supportive.
That's right. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Because
yeah, so that's yeah.
the way I look at that, I think that's awesome and I love that. But parallel kind of assumes that they're at an equal level, but, operating side by side. Whereas I think that they're vertical in nature in that
Hmm.
these new systems are actually operating at a higher level of vibrational quality or consciousness, largely
Yeah.
invisible to someone operating at the original level. Maybe not invisible, but they're just not able to really understand it or go there.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's interesting. So let's talk about the coronation and what's it about and where are we at with it.
Yeah. At the beginning of the pandemic, I wrote an essay called "The Coronation." Um, that was one of like the first dissenting, um, uh, public statements, articles in the during the pandemic. It came out in
Mm-hmm.
like March or April of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and then throughout the pandemic, I wrote other articles, um, and not so much like evidence-based refutations of masks and lockdowns and vaccines and so forth, but just more of a philosophical
Mm-hmm.
take on things, and a social analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Like I wrote a lot about mob morality and uh, the mentality of totalitarianism, and um, just anyway, I wrote a series of essays on various aspects of the pandemic, and now publishing a book called also The Coronation
Mm-hmm.
that brings all these essays together and with some new material that kind of weaves them together. So it's kind of like it kind of maps the trajectory of the pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
both as a social phenomenon, but also like for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like I in the material that weaves it together, I'm talking about like my periods of despair and
Mm-hmm.
and despondency and paralysis
Mm-hmm.
and my self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
The times where I was like, maybe everything I've been saying is wrong. How do I know
Mm-hmm.
that what I believe is true?
Mm-hmm.
And just going through all of that inner journey that many people went through a version of
Yeah.
during the
Yeah.
pandemic. So that's really what the book is about. And the reason that I'm putting it out, it's like everyone wants to move on, and that's good. But have we really learned
Mm-hmm.
from the experience?
Mm-hmm.
Have we really made sense of it all? Or are we just rushing headlong into the future with unlearned lessons that will then be repeated?
Yeah.
So that's why I
I
am
appreciate.
putting quite a lot of energy into the
Yeah, I
book.
appreciate that,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important because things are moving so fast that there is less and less reflection happening, both individually and
Mm-hmm.
culturally. And the pandemic, again, you can look at it from many lenses. In spite of what I might have said earlier, I think it's probably one of the best things that's happened to humanity in a long time. And I apologize if someone got really hurt by the pandemic and or lost lives and whatnot. I'm talking about at a cultural level. It caused, a great pause. It was helpful for the
Mm-hmm.
environment. It caused people to stop and go within. It reshaped the global economy, right? And I think a more resilient way, or it is in the process of doing that. Like, I think, if you wanted to take a positive look at it and in a retrospective look, like, this is a pivotal moment, right, in human history and
Mm-hmm.
what it means, and also the definition of what it means to be human. The next pivotal moment will be when artificial intelligence gains sentience, if that's possible, right? And then we're in for a
Yeah,
whole different game.
it could be that way. The reason I titled it the Coronation is because a coronation is, well, for one thing, it's a play on
Right,
coronavirus. But what the word means is a crown.
right.
So a coronation is an initiation into sovereignty,
Mm,
which means that choices that had been unconscious, that we didn't know we were making, now become conscious.
mm,
So it's not that the pandemic has saved us from a technocratic totalitarian future. It's that it showed us where we've been going.
mm-hmm,
So now we can choose it consciously or choose something else.
mm.
And it's my hope that we do choose something else. And that's what I work for.
Yeah, yeah, me as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. And when do you intend to have this published?
It's with Chelsea Green
Mhm.
Publishing, comes out July 28th. Um,
Okay, the good
yeah.
chance then.
I mean, you can pre-order it and stuff now. It's on Amazon and whatever.
Check.
But yeah,
Well,
coming out
this
soon.
podcast we'll try to arrange it to release around then.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome.
It's very kind of you.
And so, Charles, where do people follow you, learn more? What's the social handles and whatnot?
Um, the best place is Substack. I publish on
That's the first time I've
charleseisenstein.substack.com.
heard that one. That's awesome.
Really,
Yeah,
Substack? Oh, there's a lot of
I've heard of it,
no.
but I've never heard anyone say that's
Yeah.
where you find me. Yeah,
I mean, I have a website also,
right.
charleseisenstein.org, but the new stuff is all on Substack.
Explain what
Um,
Substack is.
yeah,
Like,
it's like pretty much a free speech platform. It's a lot of
mm-hmm,
journalists went there. Even like Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, like some actually like pretty big
mm-hmm,
journalists who were essentially censored and squeezed out, not even for being right wing. I
mm-hmm,
mean, they were just like dissidents,
mm-hmm.
And so now there's like a lot of the best writers now um, are
It's
on
a
Substack.
publishing platform. It's not a social media platform.
It's a
Right.
publishing
Yeah.
platform and not a social
Check.
media. No,
Like
yeah,
like a more thoughtful Reddit kind of thing, maybe.
it's really more of it would be more like Medium,
Okay. Yeah.
you know.
Medium is a great one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Right on. Thanks so much for your time today, Charles.
yeah,
Really
yeah. Thanks,
fascinating
Mark.
conversation. I really appreciate it, and
Uh-huh.
let's try to stay in touch somehow.
Yeah.
All
All
right.
right.
Hoo-yah. Take care now. Bye bye.
Okay. Take care. Yeah. Bye bye.